Today we're actually going to be talking about witches, and we're going to sort of go from what Hollywood's done to them to maybe talking about some, actual people who view themselves as a witch, and they practice certain things. There's so many different kinds of witches, I guess, from a
Oh
head
yeah,
witch to
it's evolved. It,
it's
it feels like
well,
it's really sort of evolved.
I don't know if it's evolved. I think it's just that it's where you see yourself. It's very personal, I think, for
Hmm.
people, right? This is not, I mean, there are people who belong to covens, and there are people who belong to, different groups, and they practice in different ways, and they maybe have more formal um, rituals and things. And then there's a lot of people that just like to practice on their own. And so we're going to kind of talk about those things and dispel some of, the myths, but we're going to really start off with Hollywood, because Hollywood has sort of been the impetus of what people think witches are, right? And
Hmm.
how they see them and how they view them. And then we're going to get into some actual history too. So who wants to start? Because I know that Ian, you're going to talk about a movie. Rachel, you wanted to talk about
Yeah.
one that kind of had an impact on you.
Yep,
And then
yep.
I'm going down the history route. So, all
Okay, yep.
right. So I'm going to talk about Hollywood
So
films.
should we start
Okay.
with Ian first then? And
Okay.
Yeah. So Ian, you want to take it away?
All right. Well, I am going to talk about one of the most hated Hollywood movies of all time.
And I'm right up there with the hating.
And and that movie is The Blair Witch Project.
yes.
Now, as I say, it seems to be one of the most hated movies ever made. I am not one of those people. They're 99 out of 100 can't stand it. I am that one person. And obviously I'm not alone, because this movie made about $250 million at the box office.
Oh,
But
because at
I
the
will,
time that was what was going on, right?
yeah,
When did
yeah.
it come out?
19 late 1990s, 1999, I think.
Oh, okay, so that's around the same time as the movie that I'm going to talk about, The Craft. I think that came out in 1996, and it
Except
seems
Yeah.
like that
one's had
90s
a couple
era.
of remakes, hasn't it? The
Yeah.
Craft, hasn't
Oh,
that one had a
does it? Yeah, unfortunately. I think it
I
has
think it's
a
had a
series.
remake and or even like
Yeah,
a TV show
yeah.
or something too. So anyway, all right. So I'm gonna let you guys go.
Sorry, and I didn't mean to
And
interrupt.
That's all right.
no,
That's
just,
all
yeah,
right.
let's go.
So, for those who have never seen this movie, and probably there are people out there that don't want to see it, it was one of the first films that came forth in the process of being a first person viewpoint. And in this case, it is from the viewpoint of three film students who go into the woods to seek out the historical legend of the Blair Witch. And it's all done through their video cameras and their film cameras. And I have to admit, why do I like this movie? Now, I will admit the plot is
Finn?
very thin. The plot was very thin in that terms, not very exciting. But what captured me is because of my filmmaking background, I could appreciate how the filmmakers presented this motion picture
Okay.
of going through the video cameras, going through the 16 millimeter film camera that the actors had. And now I caught it right away just because of my background, but there were a lot of people went to see this movie and thought that the footage was real.
Yes, this
just
is
because
true.
of the way it was presented.
Mm-hmm.
But as I say, it's a very thin plot. People will complain, okay, well, it's called the Blair Witch, but
Yeah,
there's
where's
no
the
witch. There's no witch in this movie. Well,
Oh
that's
my
not
goodness.
entirely true. Because it's the backstory is where
It
the
is.
witch is.
Yeah.
It's the fictional backstory, obviously, in the filmmaking, that then causes these three student filmmakers to go into the woods and try to seek out the Blair Witch and get into the problems that they do. And so I've got the backstory here of the quote witch. So we'll go through that, and it reads: the core of the legend is the story of Ellie Kedward, a Blair resident accused of witchcraft in 1785 and sentenced to death by exposure. Ellie Kedward was banished from Blair after many children accused her of performing witchcraft, and though she's presumed dead from the exposure, she was hung from a tree with stones tied to her limbs. The following year, all those who accused her and half the town's children vanished without a trace, making way for the curse and the legend of the Blair Witch, with the townspeople leaving Blair and vowing to never mention her name ever again.
Whatever
the town was rediscovered in 1824 and renamed Burkittsville, which actually is a real town in Maryland, which is where the film was shot.
Right.
It's interesting to note that those people out there, other than myself, who did like the film, think of it more as like a
folklore tale.
A cult following film, and these people go to Burkittsville in Maryland, and they've been stealing the sign that says "Welcome to Burkittsville" or Burkittsville population whatever, and the town council actually had to change all the signs to stop all these film freak fanatics from going in and stealing the town signs.
Wow. Great.
Okay, so to continue, the town was rediscovered in 1824, renamed Burkittsville, and the following year, a 10-year-old girl named Evelyn Treacle drowned in the shallow water of Tappy East Creek, with several eyewitnesses claiming that a ghostly white hand reached out of the water and pulled her in. Eileen's body was never recovered, and the creek became clogged, with the water useless and killing every living being who drank it. Of course, this incident was blamed on the Blair Witch, and it wasn't the only one. In 1886, an 8-year-old kid named Robin Weaver got lost in the forest around Blair, met an old woman whose feet, quote, didn't touch the ground. And that is the backstory of the Blair Witch, which then the three
perpetuates to become
the three fictional film students in the film went to investigate. So there's your witch.
So here's my question: is there any truth to the stories, or was it literally just
no? It's completely fiction.
Okay.
It's completely fiction.
So
yeah.
What they've done, it sounds like they kind of cherry picked from other stories from other locations, Salem being one of them. And,
if you read into what I just read to you, if you know paranormal and sort of witchcraft history, you can see that where they have drawn from, the filmmakers have gotten their information from and just sort of compiled it and created a whole new story out of it.
Yeah, because to me it sounds like a little bit of Salem, a little bit of Hansel and Gretel, and
exactly.
And a couple of other things.
There's your backstory, and there is the Blair Witch.
Right. So interesting in the way that film was handled. Now, my thing with the film is that I just found it was very thin plot wise. I know a lot of people had problems watching it too because it was handheld, and so it was very bumpy in motion. People were getting sick from
I've
trying
heard
to
that.
watch
Yes.
the
Yeah.
movement.
Yes.
And that, for me, it really was just a very thin storyline, and the characters had zero development, really. Like, you never really got to figure out who they were or what their, sort of objectives were, other than they were these film students. And so to me, that's where the film falls down a lot. The idea, though, of shooting it that way was interesting because no other, there had never been sort of a horror movie filmed that way before. So
that was the first one.
Yeah, it did add realism to it, which is why I think a lot of people believe that it was real. The thing with that was they didn't really get too much into the witch unless you read into the backstory, right? So you really didn't find out what exactly was going on. At least I felt like it was kind of a literally Salem meets Hansel and Gretel scenario, right?
Yeah.
But this is the way that Hollywood likes to, perpetuate,
build the suspense. Yeah.
well, and also too, it's a different way of treating a witch story, right? So unlike, where you go back to the sort of tropes of not just Hollywood, but fairy tales too, right? I mean, we have stories like Snow White, and we have, these other stories where the witch it's really weird. It's like you get the crone, the hag, the wart-nosed, Wizard of Oz.
You think of the Wizard of Oz.
Right.
The Wicked Witch of the West with the pointy hat and the big nose with the warts on it.
And had to be ugly, right? And that's sort of a real, what's happening there is that they're using witches as a scapegoat to try and teach a morality lesson, right? If you're bad, you're ugly and old and craggy and you can do evil things. But then you have like Glinda the Good Witch, who's beautiful, and she's able to do lovely things for you. And I think that this is sort of the thing that happened. And I'm going to step back for a minute because, Rachel, I want you to talk about the movie that you like and that had an influence. And then we're going to talk about the history side of it.